All right, great. Hey, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are tuning in from. I appreciate everybody showing up and being here right now. It's really exciting. Accessibility Officer founded in 2021 as a digital accessibility agency. And in 2022, we started the Certified Accessibility Testing Program, which is what everybody here uh, is a part of. And the whole goal of this whole thing that we're doing is to provide career pathways for people who are blind or visually impaired or otherwise severely disabled to enter the digital accessibility field, right? So that we can create a living and independence and financial abundance and make choices in our lives, right? I'd say sometimes that every time a blind person gets a job, an angel gets its wings. Our vision is that the U.S. disabled unemployment rate is the same as the U.S. unemployment rate. And I think that experience says a lot. You really can't manufacture it. We're going to help you develop the hard skills, the soft skills, everything that you need to succeed in the real world. But there's something to be said about experience. And that's exactly what I wanted to bring to you guys today. Everybody associated with the CAT program is a voice of experience, someone who has succeeded in their career and is doing it in a competitive, integrated employment environment, and succeeding. And we can tell you guys everything, but I think it's also important for you to hear it from others and the path that they've taken. So, without further ado, I want to introduce Jeff, who I'll let him introduce himself and his background here in a second. But Jeff is a blind software engineer who uses a screen reader and just happens to be in the digital accessibility field. So, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your time, your experience, your wisdom with us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here and really happy that I had the opportunity actually for our paths to cross. And I guess I can start by just sharing a little bit about myself. I've been blind now for about maybe 20 plus years, something like that, but I wasn't born blind. So um, I kind of had to learn sort of abruptly. I think my story is similar to Tanner's story. Wasn't planning on being blind, but it just kind of happened. I have what's called retinitis pigmentosa, and it was diagnosed as sort of a gradual. It was supposed to be like a gradual onset that didn't turn out to be the case. So all of a sudden, I found myself in a position where my vision was failing, and I had to figure something out. And I didn't even know about computers or any of those things until after I had lost my vision. So prior to that, I was studying philosophy at university and was planning on some career as a maybe a professor at the university level in either philosophy, physics, math, or something like that. I was really interested in things like that, and I was also a professional musician at right after that. My vision started failing, and I didn't know about computers, so I didn't know what else to do. So I did music professionally. Met my wife, and once she's also a musician, and I was in the studio the one day learning to record some parts for a band that was in the studio, and they had hired me to do some recording for them. And one of my friends, who's a bass player, came in, and he was at the university at the time and said, "Hey, look at this. I'm thinking of switching my major to this thing called information science because it has like a 97% placement rate for in terms of a career opportunity after graduation." Sorry, my dogs are maybe going to make some noise in the background. Hopefully they won't disturb us too much. So that's what initially though turned me into thinking about this technology thing, because here I am with this failing vision, can't read anymore. And it turned out that I learned about screen readers and things, went through vocational rehabilitation, learned JAWS, learned NVDA, and before I even had a handle on that stuff, my wife started reading to me computer programming books from university. We went up there and looked at that with that. What is this? this information science thing all about? And right next to it were all the computer science books. And I said, well, these ones sound way more interesting. So we grabbed some of those, and she started reading to me. So long story short, I was already blind when I started my path into this sort of technology. Technology is really a blessing from the Father above, for sure. I mean, it gives us complete parity, really, with our sighted, counterparts in the workplace and just in our personal lives too. And so the end of the story is now I've been a lead or senior level architect and software engineer for about 20 years, really just shortly after I lost my vision. So, losing my vision, I kind of gained access to the world through technology. And right now, I currently work for a company specializing in accessibility, very similar to some of the stuff you guys are doing here, all the great work that's being done, accessibility officer. Um, Very similar. And we actually have, I don't know, dozens and dozens of blind auditors that do manual auditing. And so I can share some of the perspective from my personal life as a software engineer, but I also have quite a bit of insight into what it's like to be out there on a daily basis as, a blind accessibility auditor. So I'm happy to take those questions as well. So it's kind of a
Awesome.
long-winded intro, but I wanted to try to cover as much as I could in as few words as possible.
Jeff, tremendous. And so for everybody, we're going to open it up to so Jeff can answer your questions specifically later in the second half of the or later in the call. But Jeff, like, you've been in the game for a couple decades now. Like, what was like the moment where you were like, oh wow, digital accessibility could be a career? And I want we'll come back to earlier parts of your employment journey, but tell me a little bit about when digital accessibility was like, ding, like I can make money doing this.
Well, I think it was first whenever I saw, that what I talked about that time, and I was in the studio, and my buddy walked in, and he had just changed his major over to information science. And when I saw that kind of employment rate, I mean, that was around 2002 or so, 2001, 2002, 2003, somewhere in that range, within those few years. But when I saw that kind of level of placement, I mean, this was just placement for all their graduates, and looked at the computer science stuff, and it was coupled with the knowledge of the fact that there are screen readers, and I didn't know what the heck a screen reader was, but I knew that it was something that would give me access to a computer. So I kind of put those two together, connected those two dots, and realized there's got to be some opportunity here.
Yep. Awesome. So now, so you went and you got your degree, and as you're coming into, you're looking for employment, how are you going about doing that? How are you preparing for employment, and what was that journey like?
So the real what really opened the door, like the game changer for me, was a company. So I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There's a company here called Bender Consulting, and they specialized in placing people with disabilities. So they already had some partnerships. They had a network that they were, had established for themselves, and that was the real door opening event for me. Is that once I learned about them, I registered with them, and they started getting me interviews. I mean, I think it was just the second interview that landed me a position as a consultant. And actually, at the time, it was purely accessibility driven. I wasn't there as a software engineer. I was there to help out with the accessibility of a website. This is way before we even thought of things like accessibility audits or anything like that, because this was around 2005. And WCAG was a thing. The ADA was like Section 508 stuff had really kind of become entrenched at that point, and that was what opened doors. So it's a very similar situation to what you're doing, Tanner. You guys are providing sort of that gateway, that path to employment through your training and your network. So it's very similar.
When you're, you know, s- that's awesome. Joyce Bender and Bender Consulting and everything that they're doing is pretty cool. And I know I know friends who have come out of that who are in the digital accessibility field right now. Um, and but so when you're transitioning, like, vendor consulting services, it helps you kind of, get your foot in the door, get an opportunity to, provide some value to an employer. But now moving forward and you having to get source that job on yourself for yourself, secure gainful employment and then retain it. What are you looking for with regards to a company? How do you approach that, and how do you position yourself as someone with a disability that can provide value? And hey, I'm worth this job.
Well, one of the things that I always sort of walked in with was knowing that, look, I mean, I'm here for this interview. You're interviewing me, but this is a two-way street. I'm interviewing you as well. And so I would often ask questions around their culture. I mean, is accessibility included in your culture? Or even better, is there a culture of accessibility just sort of baked in the just the company's attitude, around everything from their operations, their facility in terms of like literally, do they have the accessible, you know, uh, for instance, elevators can be challenging for someone who's blind if they don't speak, if they don't beep, they don't speak, all of those kinds of things. And so I would actually be interviewing the company as well to see if they didn't have the culture in place, did they have the desire to bring that kind of inclusivity into their workforce, and could they truly appreciate what anybody brings walking in that door? Because one of the things I've always done is I kind of include the fact that, look, when you have a disability, you're essentially in a world that wasn't designed for you. The kind of the assumption is that you're going to be fully able, whatever that might mean, but that's kind of how the world developed. And so sort of intrinsically, people that have these kinds of disabilities, so-called disabilities, um, we're the world's best problem solvers. We have to do it all the time. So, when you're in there for a job interview, you're there to help them solve a problem. And we have inherently just the practice, the experience, and the reinforcement of constantly having to solve problems.
Yep. Yep. Um, Jeff, real quick for everybody on here, are you on LinkedIn?
I am, but my resume is super, super outdated. I didn't really go that avenue. So I mean, I am on LinkedIn, but I could be doing a much better job than I am.
Yeah, so everybody on here, if I would highly recommend connecting with Jeff on LinkedIn. Jeff, when there's sighted analysts, there's sighted testers, there's blind testers, blind analysts, and you have to be competitive in the work, like just having the hard skills, and then you have to demonstrate it, right? When you're talking about working with other people who maybe aren't in a situation like us, they aren't screen reader users, they aren't relying on assistive technology. How do you navigate that cultural component? How do you're in a senior role, right? You announced your position, you're a senior architect. So how do you navigate those kinds of environments, those kinds of conversations, those people, and really kind of position yourself into a place where you can demonstrate your value?
So verbal communication is critical. You have to be a really good communicator, but even more important and higher level of criticality is being a good listener. You have to be a really good listener. And so communication is always paramount in any kind of professional environment. So what I generally do is explain to those who might not be familiar with it that when it comes to computing and like especially like a graphical user interface, I see with my ears, and I kind of give them a little preface and explain how screen reader works, usually up there at 00 in the upper left corner, and you can scroll from left to right, top to bottom, and that's how, and of course there are exceptions, with being able to navigate with various different keystrokes and things like that. But that's not the important part. The important part is helping to convey how it is I understand a UI, and then the rest is just really being patient, being a terrific listener, and learning how to communicate in ways that others can understand you. And those are pretty much skills that aren't particular to somebody who has a different kind of approach, based on a disability. I mean, those are just common to anybody who's going to be successful in professional environment.
What do you think is the difference between the people who succeed in digital accessibility and the people who don't?
I think the people who succeed in digital accessibility truly want to see accessibility realized in terms of usability and not just meeting requirements. That's always, to me, the definitive aspect is that they want the accessibility to be really one-to-one experience with somebody who say has the more traditional the more traditional approach where you're not relying on a braille display or a screen reader or some kind of special device to help you navigate if you've got like a physical deficit or something like that, or even cognitive things. I mean, the those who really want the experience to be on par across the board, they're the ones that are going to get it done. And it's not just accessibility, it's making that accessibility usable.
Love it. I want to talk a little bit about the day to day, some of the expectations, what employers have wanted from you in terms of performance or maybe, workplace applications. So, right now in your current role, can you talk about a little bit of your, not so much the higher level responsibilities, but what you're expected to do on a daily basis?
Sure. So I'm expected really to just be developing software, just alongside we're a small, very small, nimble team of four guys, four developers, and use that term "guys" kind of broadly just to mean
Sure.
all four of us. But all four of us are kind of tasked with the same thing. So we're given a feature enhancement or a new feature that we have to develop, and or a bug that we have to fix, and that's pretty much my day to day. I mean, as a senior member of the team, every day I have a check in with upper management just to let them know how the health of the project is, things along those lines. Any kind of impediments we might be expecting or encountering. So I'm involved in also a lot of the project management aspect as well, and I'm kind of the resident on the development team. I'm the only blind developer, so I'm kind of also the go-to guy for accessibility questions, anything WCAG, in terms of implementations and best practices and things like that.
Can you give me a list, and even if it might sound remedial, give me a list of some of the applications that you use daily, week to week in your job?
Sure. So NVDA, it goes without saying. So NVDA is my go-to screen reader. We have one of those corporate shared licensing schemes for JAWS. So we've only got 5 of them available at any given time, and just the sheer volume of users. If I have to test with JAWS, a lot of times I'll save that for early in the day or later in the day, since we have auditors who absolutely have to have access to JAWS to get their work done. So I'll use JAWS just for comprehension, like comprehensive testing a surface. But I also use like Visual Studio Code on a regular basis. I prefer Windows for that reason, NVDA and JAWS. I find Mac's voiceover is real good, but it's just so different than what I'm used to. Being in this thing for a while now. So I do use on Windows, I use the subsystem for Linux. So I use an Ubuntu operating system most of the time when I'm developing on Windows, because our target deployments are always Linux boxes. So I develop in Linux, and I like that quite a bit. So those are really the go-to things. I mean, we use a bunch of Microsoft productivity tools. So like Teams is our communication tool. We used to use Slack. I prefer Slack, but for like real-time communication and meetings and things like that. But we're using Teams now. We migrated over to Teams. We use SharePoint for a lot of shared documents, and the Microsoft tools like Excel. What is the other one? Email is Outlook, um, Word, and things like that. So mostly Microsoft tools, plus Visual Studio Code, which is my code editor, which is actually another Microsoft tool, an open source tool, and I use Linux as a sort of layer on top of the Windows host operating system.
Great. Thanks so much. I lost track. I stopped counting after I think 37 tools. uh, when you, obviously when you're doing this day to day to day, or at least when you're onboarding, when you're training, when you're learning something new, you get hit with a workplace application, you probably have questions. How do you find the answers?
Um, well, I mean, you have to be persistent for sure. You have to be persistent, you have to be patient, and you have to ask. I mean, usually the answer to those questions, finding those answers, like, is there a knowledge base, or is there onboarding documentation in addition to what we're doing here? Are there video archives that I can refer to if I need to go back and review? Or and once you exhaust those routes, is there somebody that I can talk to that can get me right to where I need to go uh, at a moment's notice? But I mean, the big part of that is ask until you find.
Love it. So, I mean, staying competitive as a developer, I mean, code's changing all the time. The programming language, the way that we're designing things, developing things, that's changing all the time. How do you keep your skills sharp? How do you stay competitive? How do you stay on the cutting edge?
You just have to keep up. So, I mean, I'm bookmarked billions. It seems like at times billions of bookmarks. And there's lots and lots of online. I mean, I also have subscriptions to like Pack Publishing and O'Reilly. So those are good sources for great books and other training materials. But I mean, you really have to keep up, and that's again not just something that we have to do as say blind developers or as somebody who has another kind of physical challenge, but that's just common to the field. I mean, you kind of go in knowing that this is a never ending thing and you're just going to have to keep up.
Is that something you do like outside of regular business hours? Like this is just something this is just the cost of doing business?
That's right. I do that after business hours. I mean, sometimes there'll be that overlap where I'm doing like something in the capacity of say like R&D, trying to discover if this is a good off the shelf solution. And so I'll have to learn as part of my actual work. But most of this stuff I do after hours as well, like keeping up with, like, I don't know, say there's a new release of a JavaScript framework or something that I pretty much do off hours. Unless now, see, there can definitely be overlap. I mean, if my boss says, "Hey, look, we're gonna be moving from this framework version to this next one. Can you tell me if there's any breaking changes?" I mean, then clearly that's something I can do at work. But there's an awful lot required off work hours, and that's just an understanding implicit in, signing on to be a software engineer.
Yeah. Would you make that kind of like akin to ongoing learning and development, getting certifications, you know, staying in tune with the field is regardless of the industry you're in, do you think today staying competitive is requires that kind of focus and ongoing effort?
Yeah, I think it's very common in almost any business domain, unless you're doing something that is super stable and established. I can't even think of a good example because so much has changed. Like even thinking, like I had a friend who he was blind and he liked to do woodworking, and that would have been fairly stable. But even then, they're always coming up with better accessible tools, and you have to kind of learn, those tools, or you have to learn other little tricks. Like even a lot of my musician friends, we used to have knobs. They were very physical, so you could just kind of memorize from left to right. Okay, this knob does this or this knob does that. But now a lot of those are digital screens, so if they're not voicing, then you kind of have to remember tap twice to the right, swipe down 3 times, so there are always things, and those tools generally are making people more productive. So no matter what business domain you're in professionally, or even just personally as a hobby or something, I think it's probably the case that you're going to have to continuously learn.
Coming back up to a little bit higher level, and then I want to open it up to everybody here to ask you questions, Jeff, is what's something that you did wrong and you wish you could have taken back?
Let me think. Well, one of the things I did wrong for sure was and this was a biggie for me, and I think it's a mistake that a lot of us make, is that I was thinking of myself as a blind professional software engineer, blind fill in the blank, blind musician, fill in the blank. That was a mistake, actually. Nobody is thinking of me as a blind software engineer whenever they're looking at my code. They're just saying, this is okay. Yeah, this is a pull request that Jeff put out there. I'm going to look at his code. That, to me, I think was the biggest mistake I made. And I corrected that. I did a course correction very, very early on, because if you kind of approach things from that context, you'll find that it's a barrier to communication. Um, you have to kind of remove that filter and just remember that if you're working as an accessibility auditor, well, you and your cited counterparts are doing the same thing. Your goal is the same. It's just how you do it that's a little bit different. So all of the terminology is going to be in common, and the outcome is going to be in common. The only thing that's going to be different is, and actually a lot of times the cited auditors on our team will use NVDA or JAWS just to see, well, heck, with just by vision alone, I'm not quite grasping all this. I need to see what's going on here. So they turn to NVDA to get a better feel. So that was my biggest mistake, was thinking, well, I'm blind, and everybody needs to know that so we can continue to recognize that maybe I'm approaching things differently. But the real truth is, if you remove that barrier, things go much better.
Love that. When you're thinking about your career path, what's in front of you, how much longer you're going to go, if you're going to stay in this field, like what's your professional goal? What's are you still climbing the ladder, or are you comfortable? Tell me about how you see the future of your career.
Well, I also have my own LLC, so I do sort of project work for myself as well. So I run a company, kind of on the side, as putting as much time into it, as I want and as time permits. I mean, my first responsibility is always to my employer, but there have been times in my career where I didn't have permanent employment because I didn't want it. I would work a 3-month contract or do a 6-month contract and then take some off, do my, work on a product of my own. So, you know, uh, based on those experiences, I really enjoy developing software. I still love playing music. And I just try to make sure I have work-life balance. And my goals really, I done so much already. I've been in architectural roles. I've been in lead roles. I probably one of my favorite roles was I led the UI team, the client side team of sighted people, helping them design and implement the user interface that everybody was seeing. I was being a blind. It was ironic, and we actually won an award that year internally at the employer I was with, as that was considered the best application
That's
of the
awesome.
year. Yeah, so that was really a sort of a fun one. But yeah, I think I'm happy doing things in around. I've always been a creative person, so I enjoy creating, and sometimes I find it to be a bit tedious for me to um, do sort of like administrative type stuff, and that stuff is just as important. It needs to be done, but those are the kinds of the things that in the end up motivating me in a particular direction.
I love it, and it's definitely did not and coordinate the call to go in that direction. But yes, I mean, we're talking about creating together. I hope that that works out for everybody. But do you want to share with everybody briefly how actually our paths crossed?
Sure. I was just killing some time, sort of decompressing, scrolling through my Facebook feed, and I saw this post sort of requesting potential names for a product, a manual testing product. And thought, well, I could probably throw something in that direction. And so, yeah, one thing led to another. And we've had some really interesting conversations ever since.
Yeah, it's been a great journey, and I think that, Jeff, this conversation has been tremendous, but I really want to hear from the students, the apprentices, everybody who's been able to join and hear this kind of conversation, thinking about your own experience, like where you're coming from and where you want to go. When you can ask Jeff anything here, I want you to think about that and start asking your questions. But Jeff, my final question to you is that if there was one piece of advice that you could give yourself when you were starting digital accessibility, if there was one piece of advice that you wish you knew then that you know now, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself, make sure you know your tools inside and out, because it's going to either cost you a lot of time, or you could potentially embarrass yourself. It happens to me several times when I thought I knew enough JAWS or I knew enough NVDA to do this or do that. And I'd say, well, no, no, that definitely isn't accessible. And then only to find out after doing a little bit of digging 2 or 3 days later, oh, wait a minute. There is a way to reach, that particular screen component or whatever. And there are these key keystroke combos that can get me this, or I can even create my own, or I can even go in there and script JAWS. I mean, I so after discovering those things, that's what I would tell myself way back in the beginning, is that know those tools inside and out, because they really are the bridge that allow you to use to interact with these machines in any meaningful way.
I love that. I love that. Couldn't agree with you more, Jeff. Knowing your tools and being the best tester is about leveraging your tools to their fullest capacity. Awesome, awesome, awesome answer. I hope that resonates with everybody here. And Heather, do you want to manage the room with the raised hands? It looks like we got Yael and
Ariana.
Ariana as well.
So
Yeah.
let's go Yale first, and then we'll go to Ariana.
Okay. Hi, I'm Yael Saperstein. Jeff, thank you so much for talking to us today. I really appreciate it. I also have RP, so a lot of what you said was very relevant, specifically about the part when you were making your transition. I'm transitioning from being a speech language pathologist for 22 years with a private practice, and it's getting too difficult for me. So I'm transitioning over. I'm in the CAP program. I just had a specific question about the point that you made your transition. Did you still have a component of central vision, or were you at that point a full-time screen reader?
Yeah, so I had some vision, but my central vision, my acuity was really very, very poor. So when I first began transitioning, I had a CCTV. That was one of the things that was issued to me when I went through the vocational rehabilitation program. So I had a CCTV, and it just got to the point where I mean, I was reading like maybe 2 pages an hour or something, that I had to use magnification that was so extreme that I could only literally like focus one letter on this screen. And also my central vision became so poor too that I would actually kind of look off to the side to use my peripheral vision to sort of see objects in my path or things like that. So my acuity was very, very poor, and so my focus out of necessity became the screen reader.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Ariana, I think you were next.
Hi, Jeff. My name's Ari, and thank you for your presentation. It was awesome. I just wanted to say that I related to you a lot on several points that you made between Windows versus Mac. I also lost my vision when I was little. So my question is, I eventually would like to have my own business at some point after I've had enough work experience under my belt. How did you get started with that when you started your LLC? Like, where did you go and to like get that up and running?
Ah, boy, I wish I could think of the name of the company. I mean, you can there's the more sort of well-recognized one is called LegalZoom, but there are others that you can just, if you just do a web search, you'll find online ways to incorporate and things like that. And it's not like absurdly expensive, a few $100s, and you can have an LLC going, or, and depending on the kind of corporation you settle on. Usually, too, they provide a lot of documentation to go through to try to understand. Of course, you can pay for consulting hours, and they'll explain things to you if you prefer that route. And I definitely, did a bit of both. I spent a long time just with web searches generally, and I wish I could think of the company. It's been so long. I incorporated back in 2007, so I honestly can't
It's
remember.
okay.
Yeah, but you can. I mean, I would recommend, first of all, just do web searches to learn about your different options. And then, you'll also find these service providers, use whatever resources they offer. And I paid the extra money for consultations, just to make sure that I wasn't misunderstanding something. And when it comes to something like that, I didn't want to make a mistake.
Okay. And when you first started out with that, like from from working for somebody to then working for yourself, I'm a little bit nervous about that. So what kind of advice do you have?
Yeah. So
Sorry, I
definitely,
haven't
yeah,
had
no,
enough coffee, but I
I,
think I
I
know what I'm trying to ask.
And I think I'm understanding what you're trying to ask. So just stop me
Okay.
if I'm misunderstanding. But I think what you're asking is, like, how do you make a transition from going from, like, say, a full-time employment perspective, or even a part-time employment with an employer, to running your own shop? Um,
Yes.
okay, and the answer that give, and the advice I've given to others that have asked me, and not just those with disabilities, but just generally, I didn't want to take that risk to just completely make it one cut and move into the sort of the self-employed running my own company thing. So what I did is I drank a lot of coffee, and I built my business in the evenings, off hours, and on weekends. And that's what I did, because I did not want to take that risk. And then once I got to a point where financially I felt comfortable, with things, that's whenever I decided to do the independent consulting. But almost always I have had a full-time gig, and then I do project work on the side. If I know I want to go on whatever 3-week vacation overseas or something, and I know it's going to cost X, then I'll find project work to make sure I cover X. In the past, that's what I've done a lot. And then there have been other years, like when I was younger, where I would put an extra whatever 20 or 30 hours a week on the side project work, and just to just make myself financially comfortable. But I didn't ever really do it at the exclusion one to the other. I transitioned gradually with the security of, the health coverage that came from full-time employment, and the 401k match, and all of those other benefits. And it's just great to learn in the environment of an established business, where they already have their operations down, and you have coworkers that are approaching problems in different ways. It's just such a tremendous learning experience. So I didn't want to cheat myself out of all of that free knowledge and experience too.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a great thing. Heather and I are super supportive of entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial journey, as we are, Heather and I. And, if that's something valuable for us to do, or provide you guys like a boot camp on, entrepreneur best practices and resources, let us know, and we can help out with that. Awesome questions, Ari.
Anyone else? So then I will ask my question to Jeff. No one else is answering their answer. So Jeff, thank you again for taking your time to do this. My question is, I have a similar computer science background, going to a four-year university, getting that computer science degree. So we share that, but not all of our CAT students have that deep of a technical computer science background. I've been approaching it saying it's not necessary, it's helpful, but not necessary. And I would just like to hear your opinion on that and to expand on any experience that you've had with testers and their success rate and given their backgrounds.
Sure. So actually, I don't have any formal training in computer science. So my degree
Oh,
is in philosophy, and I was in graduate school when my vision went south. So that's it. Was just happened. I mean, I had very little useful vision, very low vision at the time, and that's when I was doing music full time. And it wasn't until that day when Matt walked in and said, "Hey, I'm switching from journalism to information science because of the placement rate." Well, I went, with my wife, and we drove up to the bookstore to see these books he was reading, and the computer science section was right there adjacent to the information science. And I told her, "Well, these books sound way more interesting. So we grabbed the Kernighan and Ritchie C programming book,
yep.
and we took it home, and she read it to me, and that was my introduction to C programming. So you don't have to have a formal background for sure. I mean, I am self-taught all the way. And not even, able to, at that time, I didn't know enough about JAWS and NVDA to even find like a text file, plain text file to actually read a copy of the book. She literally read it to me, and I'd ask her, "Can you go back and read that sentence again? And can you spell that word? What's," whatever it was, like something, very sort of computer sciencey terminology, like idempotent or something like that. I don't recall what it was, but that's kind of how it went. It was very slow going, but it was interesting, and
Well, there
and it
goes
got me to the
the
finish line.
point of making sure that you're listening. And I made assumptions because you told that story, and I just assumed that meant that you were also transitioning your degree. So I apologize for that, but thank you very much for that answer.
Well, no,
Appreciate it.
you're very welcome.
I just want to pull back and say that's coming full circle for me now. Like, Pat's blown away. Jeff, like Jeff had indicated, we've had conversations, and just his knowledge of how things work and his technical aptitude is tremendous, right? It's impressive. And to hear him say that he's self-taught, I mean, if you knew what I knew when he says that, you'd be like, wow, like, where's the books? I can do this. Incredible that you're self-taught, Jeff. Wow.
Yeah, and actually, in my experience too, the self-taught, developers and engineers, they're actually the most skilled in my from in my professional experience, and even in my personal experience. I think a lot of the reason that is when you're self-taught, it's because you really have. I mean, there is no such thing as like the right motive or something like that, but it clearly means that it's something you wanted to do. You had an interest in it. I mean, nobody's going to teach themselves something they just absolutely despise. I mean, it's just not physically,
Right.
it's like trying to force yourself to eat food you hate or something. You know what I mean? So I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, is that, when you're self-taught, it's because you truly are motivated for, the quote unquote right reasons.
And Ariana had their hand up for just a moment, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just had one more question, and then I gotta go and get ready for class. Tanner just brought up something that I just thought of. So given the fact that we have the current CAP program now, from someone who's I can't talk today, I'm so sorry. But when you first started out in digital accessibility, versus what they've got now, do you wish that there was a program like this? Like, do you wish that there was something similar to this back then, or are you?
No, absolutely. I mean, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if there was something like that, I would have been the first in line to enroll, because sure, you can learn so much from, you know, the if you can learn from the mistakes of others and how they gained their experience and their knowledge, way better than having to learn from your own mistakes, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
so much more difficult if we're making our own mistakes. A lot of times, we're not even realizing that we're making a mistake until it reaches some sort of critical mass, and then we're like, wow, I mean, I've been doing it this way the whole time, and it finally came back to bite me in the rear. So it just learning in the environment where people can bring their experience and their expertise. They've already been down that road, and it's, I think, pretty pretty wise to tap that knowledge if you have an opportunity.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
And Fredericks has his hand up.
Hello, Jeff. Nice to meet you. I wanted to ask a question since you're self-taught. How did you basically express that you're capable of doing the job without having the degrees and certifications to do so? In my personal experience, sometimes they just want to see the piece of paper. I think a lot of people know that self-taught people are really capable and they're the best, but sometimes depending on who you interview with, they're just like, oh, you don't have a degree. They kind of like see it as like a bad thing. Did you encounter that? And if you did, how did you get around that?
Yes, that is definitely a problem, and it's a very frequent problem. So it helps to be able to, well, one of the things I did is I would carry a laptop with me with a screen reader loaded on it, because I actually had employers that would come in and say, "How in the world are you even applying for this? This is a computer." You realize, this is a computer. You have to be able to see the monitor. And I was like, "Well, actually, I don't. Let me show you." And so carrying a device with you these days, it's going to be a mobile phone. Just pop on TalkBack or VoiceOver and just demonstrate how quick you can. I mean, actually, in my day, back in those days, using a keyboard, I was able to jump around the screen, navigate much more quickly than my sighted counterparts using a mouse pointer, because I just had keystrokes memorized, and bam, bam, bam. I was able to just knock these tasks off right, one after another immediately. So having that device there so you can demonstrate, invaluable. The other another approach, I wouldn't say the other, but another approach, is to make sure you've got a portfolio up so you can demo some of the project work you've done. You could just hand off a bunch of URLs and say, here, I developed this, or developed that, or carry with you, if you can't keep it in your head, a list of the online tools that you use. So if you're going for some sort of finance position or something, we'll say, hey, look, here's what I use, and I use it with the screen reader, and it's really accessible. So here I can go over and I can view this bar chart, because this company actually makes sure that accessibility is a priority. And so I can actually gather all the same data and use that to formulate a strategy that my sighted counterparts can.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And I have definitely done that, take the laptop to the interview thing before. And it was interesting. It did spark a conversation, but I only done that once. So now I think I'm just gonna keep doing it every time I get an interview.
Yeah, and it also just gives you the opportunity right there. It's implicit in that, is that you get the opportunity to sort of demonstrate your skills too. So you don't just do the, sort of an introduction to the screen readers. You say, here's how I use a screen reader to do the job that I'm applying for.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think that's all the questions. Oh, whoop, Jacques.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Jacques. Jeff, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm getting a lot from this, so I really do appreciate you taking your time to share with us. And I just wanted to ask regarding the blind auditors that work for the company you work with. Do you find that they have knowledge of developing themselves, or are they just more focused on usability and accessibility?
It both. And it seems like the ratios are pretty much the same. I know my employer prefers if people can come in knowing about things like HTML, knowing really well WCAG success criteria and all of those and how they work together. And if you've got a little bit of JavaScript skills and you can understand that, oh, well, yeah, actually this company's implementing their skip to main link with JavaScript instead of using just an inline anchor element. Those, you know, those things are all advantages. So, I mean, it's advantageous to carry that skill set in. But, you know, that being said, a lot of our auditors don't possess that skill set. But what they do all possess is an extremely high level of ability when it comes to their screen readers and being able to manually test for accessibility. The more technical, you know, sort of under the covers knowledge they have, just the more ability they have to pinpoint and to call out any kind of accessibility issues that might exist with a digital product.
Tremendous. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Then we have Ellen also has their hand. I think this one might have to be the last question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so I'm wondering whether, like you just said, not everyone needs that kind of thing, but is there a way to just learn how to read HTML without like wanting to develop a web page? Because I feel like that's what a lot of learning HTML kind of is built for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer to your question is yes. You can definitely and actually, believe it or not, as well, and I'm sure Heather can tell you that whenever you're developing software, you spend a heck of a lot more time reading code than actually writing code. I mean, you spend the vast majority of your time reading. So yes, absolutely, you can learn to read the HTML and help. That can then help to inform your you know, your analysis when you're trying to identify an accessibility issue. And there you can actually find online too, from, you know, from the Web Accessibility Initiative website, lots of other, even like Mozilla Developer Network. Even though that's target audience is for developers, and as an auditor, you can learn an awful lot from that, and you can just sort of gloss over the parts that don't really apply. But I would say you know, there's a WCAG around WCAG. There's a whole, I mean, just loads and loads of online content that can teach you how HTML maps to those success criteria and in reverse too. But I definitely would recommend doing that if, you know, if you have the desire to do so, because it just makes you all that much better when you approach auditing.
Okay. So you said Web Accessibility Institute?
Web Accessibility Initiative is WAI.
Okay.
Yep. And you also want to definitely focus on things like ARIA, the ARIA,
yes.
Accessible Rich Internet Applications. I mean, that is a must.
A lot on my project.
Yeah, so that's a must know for sure.
Okay. And it still feels very strange to me. Like I don't know how it works, but I know it messes things up a lot.
Well, here, this might be an avenue for you to follow, would be to take the ARIAs, since you're already familiar with ARIA and you're kind of mucking around in there, the ARIA, all of those ARIA attributes and roles and properties, they actually are just artificial ways of, most of the time, mapping back to native HTML elements function, you know, the functionality that is built into that. So that's a good way to reinforce your ARIA and to learn your HTML, is to take those ARIA attributes and roles, especially the roles, and map those back to native HTML elements.
All right. I'll do a bit of poking around and see what I find. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Jeff, thank you so much for today. It was super valuable for me and for, I believe, for everybody here. What an awesome conversation. Is there any final words that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, I can't underscore enough how important and eye-opening it was for me to stop thinking of myself as a blind engineer and just think of myself as a software engineer. And whatever, you know, domain you're in, I think that that is the best approach. Is just think of yourself as, you know, doing that thing, and don't think of yourself as a blind or low vision or limited dexterity person doing that thing. You're doing that thing just like everybody else. You just have a different approach.
I absolutely love that. You either win or you don't, right? Regardless of where the starting line is.
That's
So
right.
that is awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to our continued collaborations, and thank you guys all for your time and attention, and for bringing your questions to Jeff.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It was a wonderful presentation. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
Yep, it's my pleasure.
You guys all have a wonderful day.